Growing up on the Navajo Nation, I always heard stories of the supernatural passed down from one generation to the next. These tales were part of our culture, a way to teach lessons and instill respect for the land and its mysteries. My name is Tahoma, and while I've heard many such stories, none have haunted me quite like the one I experienced firsthand. It was late autumn, and the days were growing shorter, the nights colder. I had just turned 18 and was looking forward to leaving for college in the spring. But before that, I wanted to spend one last season helping my family with the sheep and preparing for the winter. Our homestead was in a remote part of the reservation, surrounded by endless stretches of desert, mesas, and canyons. It was beautiful, but lonely, especially at night when the wind howled through the canyons like the wails of restless spirits. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, my father asked me to check on the sheep. The flock was grazing in a pasture about a mile from our home, and it was my job to ensure they were safe for the night. I saddled up our old horse, Shadow, and set off, the sky above painted in the deep purples and reds of twilight. As I rode, I felt a growing unease. The air was still, too still, and the usual sounds of the desert crickets, distant coyotes, the rustling of sagebrush were absent. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath. Shadow seemed nervous too, his ears twitching at every little noise. I tried to shake off my anxiety, blaming it on the encroaching darkness and the stories I'd been told as a child. When I reached the pasture, I counted the sheep and found them all accounted for. I was about to turn back when I noticed something odd. On the far side of the pasture, near a cluster of boulders, there was a figure. It was hunched over, its movements slow and deliberate. At first, I thought it might be one of our neighbors, but as I rode closer, I realized it was something else entirely. The figure was wrapped in what looked like an animal hide, its face obscured by a hood. It moved with an unnatural jerky gait, and as it turned toward me, I saw its eyes glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. I froze, every instinct telling me to flee, but I was rooted to the spot, unable to tear my gaze away from those eyes. Then it spoke. The voice was a low, guttural whisper, like the sound of rocks grinding together. "You should not be here, Tahoma," it said, and my blood ran cold. How did it know my name? Summoning all my courage, I managed to ask, "Who are you?" The figure laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the still night. "I am the guardian of these lands, the keeper of secrets long forgotten. You have trespassed, and now you must pay the price." Without warning, the figure lunged at me, its movements unnaturally fast. I yanked Shadow's reins, urging him to turn and run, but the creature was upon us in an instant. It grabbed at my leg with clawed hands, and I felt a searing pain as its nails dug into my flesh. Desperate, I kicked out, managing to break free, and we galloped back toward home, the creature's laughter echoing in my ears. When I finally reached our homestead, I was shaking with fear and pain. My father ran out to meet me, his face pale with worry. "What happened?" he demanded. I told him everything, and as I spoke, I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. When I finished, he took a deep breath and said, "You encountered a skinwalker." The term sent a shiver down my spine. Skinwalkers are the most feared beings in Navajo culture, witches who have the ability to transform into animals or possess other creatures. They are the embodiment of evil, and their presence is a sign of great danger. My father and I went inside, where he gathered the family and told them what had happened. My grandmother, the matriarch of our family, immediately began a cleansing ritual, burning sage and cedar to ward off the evil spirits. As the smoke filled the room, she chanted prayers in our native language, her voice strong and unwavering. Despite her efforts, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to me. That night, I lay in bed, wide awake, listening to the sounds of the night. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind, sent my heart racing. I kept seeing those glowing eyes in my mind, hearing that awful laughter. The next day, my father decided we needed to seek the help of a medicine man. We traveled to a nearby village where we met with Yasi, a revered elder known for his knowledge of traditional medicine and spiritual matters. I recounted my encounter, and he listened intently, nodding occasionally. When I finished, Yazi looked grave. "The Skinwalker has marked you," he said. "It will not rest until it has claimed you, but there are ways to protect yourself." He performed a series of rituals, smudging me with sage and sprinkling corn pollen over my head. He also gave me a pouch filled with sacred herbs and stones, instructing me to keep it with me at all times. "This will help shield you from its influence," he explained. For a while, it seemed to work. The nightmares lessened, and I began to feel a sense of normalcy return. But the peace was short-lived. One evening, about a month later, I was out gathering firewood when I felt a familiar chill run down my spine. I turned and saw the figure standing at the edge of the clearing, watching me. This time, I didn't hesitate. I dropped the firewood and ran back to the house, shouting for my father. He grabbed his rifle and hurried outside, but the Skinwalker was gone. The only sign of its presence was a set of claw marks on the doorframe, deep and menacing. Realizing that we couldn't continue living in fear, my father decided to take more drastic measures. He consulted with other elders and medicine men, and they agreed to perform a powerful protection ceremony for our family and our home. The preparations took several days, and the entire community came together to help. On the night of the ceremony, we gathered around a large bonfire, the air thick with the scent of burning sage and cedar. The elders chanted prayers, their voices rising and falling in a rhythmic cadence. Hastan Yazi led the ritual, sprinkling corn pollen and making offerings to the spirits. As the ceremony reached its climax, I felt a strange sensation, a warmth spreading through my body, pushing back the cold fear that had gripped me for so long. The fire seemed to burn brighter, the flames dancing in the night air. I closed my eyes and focused on the chants, letting their power wash over me. When it was over, Yazi approached me, his expression serious but hopeful. "The Skinwalker will not trouble you again," he said. "But remember, Tahoma, you must always respect the spirits of the land. They are powerful, and they watch over us all." Life gradually returned to normal after that. The sheep were safe, the nightmares faded, and the marks on the doorframe slowly disappeared. Yet, I never forgot the terror of those nights, or the lessons they taught me. The land we live on is ancient and full of mysteries, and we must always honor and respect it. Years later, as I sit by the fire with my own children, I tell them the story of the Skinwalker. Their eyes widen with fear and wonder, just as mine did when I was a child. I want them to understand the importance of our traditions, the power of our ancestors, and the need to protect our heritage. The Navajo Nation is a land of beauty and danger, where the past and present coexist in a delicate balance. We are its guardians, and we must never forget the stories that shape us, the spirits that watch over us, and the lessons we learn from our encounters with the unknown. The beast within. When I first heard about the Wendigo, it was through whispers among the old hunters in our village. The tales were always the same: a monstrous creature born from the cold and the hunger of the northern forests that stalked the night for unwary travelers. I dismissed the stories as mere legends, folklore to keep children from wandering too far into the woods. But legends have a way of creeping into reality when you least expect them. I was a ranger by trade, tasked with patrolling the vast stretches of wilderness that bordered our small town in northern Canada. The winters were harsh, unforgiving, and this year promised to be worse than any I had experienced before. Reports of missing hikers and hunters had increased, and though the logical part of my mind attributed this to the relentless cold, a small, uneasy voice in the back of my head whispered otherwise. It was early December when I received a call about a missing group of campers. They were a couple of college students, eager for adventure and unaware of the dangers they faced. I set out at dawn, my pack heavy with supplies and my rifle slung over my shoulder. The forest was silent, the kind of silence that presses down on you, making every crunch of snow beneath your boots seem deafening. The deeper I ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. Tall pines loomed over me, their branches heavy with snow, creating an almost claustrophobic tunnel. I followed the trail markers left by the campers, bright orange ribbons tied to branches, but as I progressed, they became fewer and farther between. By nightfall, I reached their last known campsite. It was eerily quiet. The remnants of a fire lay cold and dead in the center of the clearing, surrounded by abandoned tents and scattered belongings. It was as if they had left in a hurry, or something had taken them. My breath misted in the frigid air as I inspected the area, my flashlight casting long, wavering shadows. That's when I saw it, a set of tracks, larger than any animal I knew, leading away from the camp and into the denser part of the forest. My heart pounded as I knelt to examine them. They were unlike anything I had ever seen, elongated and clawed, almost human, but not quite. A chill ran down my spine, unrelated to the cold. I decided to follow them, my rifle now firmly in my grasp. The tracks led me deeper into the wilderness, far beyond where any sane person would venture. Hours passed, and the forest seemed to close in around me. I could feel eyes watching me, an unsettling presence that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The trees whispered in the wind, and the shadows seemed to move of their own accord. I stumbled upon an old, dilapidated cabin just as the sun dipped below the horizon. It looked like it hadn't been occupied in decades, but the tracks led straight to it. I hesitated, then approached cautiously, my flashlight illuminating the rotting wood and broken windows. The door creaked open with a push, revealing a dark, musty interior. Inside, the air was thick with decay. I stepped forward, my flashlight sweeping the room, and then I saw it, a figure, hunched and grotesque, lurking in the shadows. It turned slowly to face me, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The creature was emaciated, its skin stretched tight over bones, and its mouth was filled with sharp, jagged teeth. Fear paralyzed me. The stories were true. The Wendigo was real, and it stood before me, a nightmare made flesh. The creature let out a guttural growl, and I snapped out of my daze. I raised my rifle and fired. The shot echoed through the cabin, but the Wendigo moved with inhuman speed. darting out of sight. I backed away, reloading as quickly as my shaking hands allowed. The Wendigo's growls reverberated through the walls, and I knew it was toying with me. I fled the cabin, my heart pounding in my ears. The forest was a maze of darkness and snow, but I didn't stop. The Wendigo was right behind me, its breath hot on my neck. I could hear its claws scraping against the trees, a sound that would haunt my nightmares forever. Somehow, I managed to find my way back to the campsite. My legs burned, my lungs screamed for air, but I didn't dare slow down. The Wendigo's howls grew louder, more frenzied. I reached the remnants of the fire and stumbled, falling to my knees. My rifle lay useless in the snow, out of reach. The Wendigo emerged from the trees, its eyes fixed on me. This was it. I was going to die, and no one would ever know what had happened. But then, something miraculous happened. The sun broke over the horizon, its first light piercing through the trees. The Wendigo recoiled, its flesh smoking where the sunlight touched it. With a final, enraged howl, it fled back into the shadows. I lay there, gasping for breath, until the sun fully rose and the forest came alive with the sounds of morning. Slowly, I picked myself up and retrieved my rifle. I had survived, but I knew the Wendigo was still out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for its next victim. I never found the missing campers. Their fate remained a mystery, but deep down, I knew what had happened to them. The legend of the Wendigo was real, a monstrous embodiment of hunger and despair that prowled the northern forests. I returned to town a changed man. The nightmares never stopped, and every winter, as the days grew shorter and the nights longer, I felt the Wendigo's presence, a constant reminder of the terror I had faced. I became a recluse, haunted by what I had seen, unable to share my story with anyone who would believe. But now, as I sit by the fire and write these words, I realize that the story must be told. The Wendigo is out there, and people need to know. They need to be warned. So if you ever find yourself in the northern forests, alone and cold, remember my tale. Beware the Wendigo, for it is always watching, always waiting, and its hunger knows no end. The end. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe as that really helps the channel.